Welcome to the Student Success Podcast. I'm Al Solano, founder of the Continuous Learning Institute, or CLI, a higher education online resource focused on providing community college and open access university educators with practical information on how to get results at their campus. As a resource within CLI, the Student Success Podcast is focused on just that, the challenges, opportunities, failures, and successes of practices intended to improve student success and equity. The goal is to leave you with thought-provoking ideas, nuts and bolts information, and or lessons learned from the field so you can consider how you might apply them to your institutional context. For today's podcast, it's a pleasure to have Dr. Christine Harrington. Christine has been working in higher education for over 20 years and is an expert on student success and teaching and learning. Currently, she is a professor in the Community College Leadership Doctoral Program at Morgan State University. Previously, she launched and coordinated the EDD and Community College Leadership Program at New Jersey City University and worked at Middlesex County College for 18 years in a variety of roles, including professor of psychology and student success, director for the Center for the Enrichment of Learning and Teaching, first-year seminar course coordinator, counselor, and disability services provider. Christine also served a 2-year appointment as the executive director for the Center for Student Success at the New Jersey Council of County Colleges. Christine is the author of numerous books and articles related to teaching and learning. She is the editor of an upcoming book, Creating Culturally Affirming and Meaningful Assignments, a practical resource for higher education faculty. She's frequently invited to give plenary presentations at national and local conferences, as well as at colleges and universities across the nation. Welcome to the Student Success Podcast, Christine.
Thank you so much, Al. It's such a pleasure.
I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for so long. It's so nice to finally connect. One of the things that I like to do is to start all podcasts, if you wouldn't mind sharing a hobby or story or just something outside of work.
Sure. So it's kind of a funny story because my older son always likes to joke that writing books is my hobby. So, but that's an academic thing. So I'm going to talk about something non-academic. And I just stumbled upon this new activity. Maybe you've done it before, axe throwing. I know we're like way out of the league of this. And I'm really not good at sports. Like I was always like the last one to get picked for the gym class and all. Even like cornhole and all, I struggle with these things. But for some reason, Al, I got the axe throwing. I hit like the first one. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got it on the board. It was very rewarding. And, my kids were like amazed because they couldn't believe I was actually like hitting the target and even got the bullseye sometimes. So it was kind of fun. And it was a nice family activity. And I've also done it with some of my friends as well. So it's fun, something different, non-academic.
I tried that for the first time last summer.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun. I was kind of a little vacation. I don't think I need to take more of them. I just worked too much. But anyway, I was in the Sacramento area. I flew up there and I was walking by downtown and I go, what is this? I walk in and so first shot, I got it right in the bullseye, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, you're so good. Look at you. And then the more I did it, the more I sucked.
Awesome.
As time went by, I was there. Christine, there should be some research about beginner's luck, right? There's a reason there's that saying. There's something. There has to be a science behind it. But anyway, it would just fly off the board. It wouldn't stick. So it's so funny that you mentioned that. Gosh, axes and targets. I mean, there must be some metaphor for higher ed in there somewhere. We'll explore that.
Oh yeah, it's easy to miss. That's for sure.
Now, one of the things that I was super excited about is you mentioned that you have this upcoming book about culturally affirming, and I was wondering if we can have some common language first. What is in your mind the definition of culturally affirming, and is that the same as culturally responsive? There's so many terms now with culture in instruction. So can you enlighten us, give us some clarity on what that means?
So, Al, I'm so glad that you asked that question because I really did struggle and grappled with what I wanted to call the title of the book. And to me, there's so many good terms out there: culturally responsive, culturally relevant. But I wanted to step it up a notch and call it culturally affirming. I feel like that has a validation kind of component to it that may not be quite as obvious in the other terms. And I'm going to share with you one of my chapter authors, because this book that's coming out is actually my first edited book. So it is comprised of chapters written by an extremely talented, diverse set of authors, one of whom is Adrian Martin, who wrote the chapter called "What is Culturally Affirming?" So I'm going to share his definition with you because I think it's a really powerful one. He says that culturally affirming assignments are learning tasks, endeavors, and exercises that reflect a value for students' cultural identities, acknowledge how content and learning processes are culturally constructed, and uphold cultural diversity as a productive, meaningful, and generative learning asset. So I thought that was a really powerful definition and kind of sets the tone for the entire book.
Thank you for that. That's a beautiful definition. Now let's get into some of the how that's going to be unpacked in the book. So what are some ways that we can be culturally affirming, right? We got to know who our students are. So how do faculty do that, right? What's the process for them to become more culturally affirming?
One of the very early strategy chapters is getting to know your students, and how can you be culturally affirming if you really don't know who they are? I think it's so critical for us. And some faculty might say, well, how can I do that? Before the semester starts, I'm supposed to have my assignments all worked out. Well, I think you may not know all of your individual students that semester, but getting to know as much as you can about them through different techniques. I mean, knowing your demographics through your, college stats and all, looking at your previous students and really understanding who they were, reaching out to your students before the semester starts and asking them some questions about who they are and what matters to them. Again, you may not get every student to respond prior to the start of the semester, but you'll probably get a number of them to, and they'll probably appreciate, you asking for their voices to be heard even before the start of the semester. So I think that getting to know your students is a really critical element, because it's impossible to be affirming if you don't know, much about their lived experiences or what is of value to them, what their career aspirations might be. All those variables, I think, really need to come into play. And I think that getting to know your students can help. But I'll tell you, the one strategy, I think, there's so many great strategies that the authors have talked about in this book, but the one that really rings true to me, and I don't think you can really say you're doing culturally affirming assignments without this, is choice. Because you'll never be able to create a one-size-fits-all assignment that's going to affirm every student in your class and be meaningful to every student in your class. So giving students choices around their assignments, I think, is probably at the crux of being culturally affirming. Now, ensuring those choices line up with your outcomes and are still going to provide you with good evidence that they've learned what you expect them to learn, but also ensuring those choices are culturally affirming. So you don't want 2 or 3 choices that all maybe lean on the same voices or perspectives or sources of data. You may want to provide different avenues, or all need to be done in a certain way. A lot of times faculty give choice in terms of a topic for a paper or a presentation or something. And that's a good type of choice, but I think we can go much further than that. I'll go into what is often talked about as being like a product choice or a process choice. So not just a content choice, but all 3 of those choices really do make a big difference for students and can really just allow them to take some ownership and pull on their strengths and what matters to them and build on who they are and help them shape into who they want to be and where their next step is.
So would an example of a choice be, I'm a student, so we're approaching the last 3 or 4 weeks of class. I have a choice of showing what I learned, whether it be through a paper, through a presentation, through a podcast. Do you happen to have, Christine, an example of a discipline and the kind of choices that a faculty provided?
So this is great. I think that yes, I love that you threw in the podcast. I think that's a great example. In fact, it is one of the examples in the book. I think the idea is to be not so restrictive, because many faculty, and this can go across disciplines. I know you asked for one in a specific discipline. I do have some examples, because one of the things that I think is going to be really exciting for the readers is that there are 20 examples from faculty in a variety of disciplines that share a culturally affirming and meaningful assignment. So I can share a few of those with you as well in a moment. But more broadly speaking, I think the key is to not be so, just kind of like traditional in the paper versus presentation, and to allow students to come up with more creative ways to show. The authors of the chapter on choice, Myra George and Jennifer Thompson, they caution us to make sure that we don't overwhelm our students with choices. So sometimes we give too many options. I mean, even the choice of a topic can overwhelm students, and they don't know where to start. It's not their area, and then they don't even know how to begin. So, what they suggested, and I'm a really big fan of this as well, is guided choices, kind of like guided pathways, right? We heard about that in the whole guided pathways movement, making sure we're not giving students too many options, because they sometimes, freeze and don't take action then. And instead, giving them guided choices really can be more helpful to them. But I like to always put like that, kind of fourth option, where if you have another idea about how you can demonstrate your learning, then come and talk to me about it. So that way you're not stifling the creativity of the student who really is like, oh, maybe I could do this. I wonder if I could, share my expertise in this way. It becomes something that you may not have even thought of as a faculty member that they might bring to the table. So I like having that as like the fourth, or third option, depending on how many you're giving. But I think a short list is a good idea. And I think that using multimedia options is also really powerful. So whether it's a podcast, a website, a video, it can be lots of different kinds of things. Infographics are another, I think, underutilized assignment option, because so many times in the world of work, we're asked to create these really short, visually effective documents that convey so much depth and information. So giving them some practice at creating an infographic or an executive summary or a book review. Maybe it's something that can even get published right away, so that they can get their voices out there and heard in a more academic way as well. So there's lots of options. I think there are no limits to that. And some will work better for some disciplines than others. Obviously, if you're in a biology class doing an experiment, you're going to have a lab report or something. I'm sure something like that's going to be required, and we probably would want that to happen. But does that have to be the only kind of assignment that they get to do? If there's another learning objective that maybe lends itself more to some creative options, allowing students to have that creativity, just engages them and makes them more in charge of what's happening. So I'll share with you, there's so many different examples that my contributing authors gave. I won't be able to give them all FaceTime right now, but let me just share a couple of examples. And these are really easy to implement examples across disciplines. So I purposely wanted to talk about these because I know the listeners are going to be representing all different kinds of disciplines. So Meredith May did an oral history project. And what she had them do was they had to interview someone to learn about, the history of that topic, that area. And what I loved about this was two things. One is they obviously had choice around who to interview. They had some choice around the questions that they were going to ask during the interview. So they had choice around that part of the process. And then they created a product that had real world authentic value, because it was then she had an arrangement where it was housed it was archived actually in a local museum. So it was all about the history of that area. And these personalized stories were then all like really treasures now in that community. It was like kind of like a treasure chest when you open all these stories up from all the students, and it becomes a part of their history. So I think there's a couple of pieces of that, the choice around who to interview, what questions to ask, what they wanted to learn about. And then, this isn't really the choice piece, but the authentic, meaningful part is that this lives on, because so often now our assignments are only for our professor's eyes only. So adding this additional dimension really made so much, I think really brings so much value for the student to feel like, hey, I'm a part of history now. Like I did this. And the other piece I'll just say briefly about the oral part is I feel like so many of our assignments are so focused on academic resources versus people resources. And it was interesting. This is a different book that I have, but in my student success in college, Doing What Works, it's a first year research-based student success textbook, like in first year experience type courses. I integrate actual peer-reviewed journal articles into it. And one of the articles talked about alumni reflections on their information literacy skills. And what they said was that, I walked out, I knew how to use the databases and all, but guess what? I don't have access to those anymore. And what I need to do in the world of work is rely mostly on people as resources. And I didn't get much direction or guidance or practice at that. So I don't think we do a lot of that through our assignments. And that's what I also really loved about this assignment that Meredith May shared, because it had that oral and valuing people as resources. So you could see the multidimensional cultural affirmation, piece of that assignment. I was really impressed with that. So I'll pause there to see if you have any comments. I see you're spinning, your wheels are a turning, I'm sure.
No, this is great. I think foundationally, the choice or guided choice, right? I'm wondering how faculty, or is this just more an organic process for students where the culturally affirming, so let's say you're at a college and it's federally designated as an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution, right? So let's say your campus is 65%, using the federal term Hispanic. How much should faculty say, well, now that you're going to do this oral history, please remember to talk to someone within your culture? Do they have to say that, or can it just be organic and many of these students would naturally talk to some people from their culture? I'm wondering that dynamic.
It may happen in an institution that, is diverse by nature, but I don't think we should rely on it happening by chance and just kind of crossing our fingers and hope that they do that. Clearly articulating that expectation, I think, is important. And it could be, it doesn't have to be that you have to, but I strongly encourage you to consider asking a person of color, or asking a person of a specific background. It might be a Black person, a Latinx person, a person with a disability, a woman, whatever it might be. I think that you could definitely encourage your students to do that. And by putting it out there, I think it just makes it more likely that they will. And I also think that it affirms their potential decision-making process around that as well. And then it leads to, a lot more options. I just did this myself in a class that I was teaching, and they had to identify some key figures in the field. And I really was like a sentence or two. I just strongly encourage you to consider, looking for voices that may not be as visible or as heard, and tell us about their perceptions, of these theories and concepts. And I actually had students say, thank you so much for this. I wouldn't have gone looking if you didn't say explicitly, like, I encourage you to do that. I would have just went for one of the mainstream voices, or, like somebody that was convenient, but you kind of challenged me to go and look for, somebody who may not get their voice heard as much. And I so enjoyed that dialogue and conversation. And I know that the students got to hear a much more diverse and rich conversation with so many different perspectives in every which way that you can imagine. So I think that really is pretty powerful. I'll share with you, Al. Here's another example of a assignment from the book. These two authors, Fahia Richardson and Kathleen Palmieri, they were teaching a nursing class, and they talked about, they had to do this, this project on practices or policies in healthcare. And they specifically called out, like, you had to include what were some of the cultural and religious beliefs that may or may not play a role here. What are some of the vulnerable populations this may impact, and in what way? How might this impact access? Do diseases in this, culture vary based on, who's living in that specific area? And, so they, and the list went on. I'm giving you a sampling of some of the kinds of, prompts that they gave to their students. And then after the so each of these students gave a presentation around whatever policy or practice they chose. So they had some choice around that as well. And then they had this really great follow-up activity where they asked students to engage in a reflective exercise after listening to all the different presentations. And they had to synthesize, what were some of the similarities? What were some of the differences? How might you use this as a practitioner in the field? What questions might you ask now, knowing what you know about how this might impact this neighborhood in a different way than that neighborhood? So I thought that was really very strategic on their part, because they did so many layering, there was such layering of affirming and meaningful aspects of that assignment, because not only did it forced them to have multiple perspectives on their topic, they gave choice around their topic, but then they also had that reflection piece added in, which I thought was so critical and really very helpful.
Wow, those are two great examples. And you have, what is it, over 20? That's fantastic. I love the oral history, and I love this one on nursing because, culture's in every part of our lives, but boy, does it play a role in healthcare. That's a great example. As faculty begin to think about being more intentional about culturally affirming practices, and foundationally, you have this guided choice, right? What kinds of adjustments do they need to make? Thinking of grading, right? Because they have multiple ways of trying to assess student learning. By the way, I wrote something on social media not too long ago, just a reminder that formative assessments are as much a measure of teaching as they are students learning. Right?
Yes.
Right? So, yes. But our grading policies also play a significant role, and often we inherit, it's not our fault, some really antiquated stuff that. So have you seen faculty make adjustments to how they grade, and might you unpack that a little bit?
So I think that is such an important part of this whole process. And actually, I do have a chapter on providing support and feedback, which is written by Geneva Murray and Robert Scaff. And they did a phenomenal job at really breaking down many aspects. You bring up formative assessments and the powerful role that they play. And they talk extensively about that and the scaffolding of assignments, because it's not just grading at the end of the day, but what are we doing to support them to get to the place where they can be successful on the assignment? So, what these authors have done, and I think they did a terrific job at it, was really saying, what assumptions are you making about your students? What background do you expect them to have in order to complete this assignment? And what resources are they aware or not aware of that might help them with that? How can you make that much more transparent, which is another whole chapter is on transparency. And then what kind of scaffolds can you provide? In what ways can you maybe demonstrate, provide practice opportunities? So those formative assessments that you talked about are really good reflection opportunities for us, as you mentioned, as faculty, to know where we need to provide further guidance and support. But it's also really good for students to see where they can, start to gain some self-efficacy and confidence, and where they might need to put a little bit more energy. Because it, the grading part is such an emotional part of the process, and being able to support them along the journey, I think, is so critical. So when you structure your assignments in this way that they build on each other, and they're not these high stakes exams that are fraught with bias and stereotype threat and all these, really negative, outcomes, especially for subsets of students, especially those from historically marginalized populations. We want to try to avoid those, and instead kind of build a scenario where students are able to showcase their strengths in ways that value who they are, and to help them develop the skills that they need in order to pursue what they're looking for. So I wanted to try to emphasize that first, and then I'll talk about grading more specifically as well. So the grading, I think, is also key. You're probably familiar with TILT, the transparency framework. And, that really involves, sharing the purpose, the why of the assignment, the task, the what of the assignment, and then the grading criteria, so they know what they're being graded on. And I think we often fall short on clearly communicating that. And, yes, you can do that in a rubric. And I think there's certainly pros of rubrics. But I don't think we need to get always like with an analytical rubric. Sometimes it's a little bit much. We can also convey our expectations in other ways. I've been a little bit more of a fan of the holistic rubric more recently. I think there's, pros and cons of every different approach, but clearly articulating, what we expect from students so that there's no surprises at the end of the day. We need to be mindful that grading is a very emotional experience. For us as well as them. I don't know, but I always feel emotional when I'm grading. I know at the end of the term, if someone misses the mark, I feel really badly. Like I feel like I missed the mark then, and I didn't do good by that student. So I need to kind of think through what I could do better to support them, and how I can, help them accomplish what we set out to accomplish. So in terms of the grading, I would say that one of the areas that I'm kind of a big fan on is giving students the opportunity to revise and resubmit their work. I think that's pretty powerful. Now, I know faculty out there listening to this are going to be like, oh my God, Christine, like I can't go and grade all my stuff after doing it yesterday. I don't want to do it again today and tomorrow. Like, oh my God, it's exhausting. And I get it. I really do. And I do think it's important that we take time out to have some fun. And whether you're going extra when or doing something else, you need to have some non-academic time. You can't just grade papers and assignments all day and night. But I do think we can integrate some of that feedback into class time. I'm a big believer in how we communicate our values to students, in a classroom situation is often through what is graded and how do we spend our time. So if we, grade a lot of these formative assessments and they're not harshly graded, they're incentivized kinds of grades where they're, meaningful enough that they, feel it's worth their investment, but not so much that it's going to negatively impact their final grade, then that's all good. But we also need to spend our class time giving that feedback. So rather than having them submit it when it's not ready to be submitted, we can do some of that in draft mode and all ahead of time. I like to do some spot checking during class while they're working on another project. It really isn't that time consuming to run around and give some general feedback. And then you have that, eye contact, and you can see whether or not they're getting it, or whether you need to say it differently or say more about it and give more details, because your feedback isn't useful if they don't understand it. I think integrating that is really key. So I know I'm talking more feedback than grading, but I think that revise and resubmit opportunities are really powerful if you're able to. The other thing that I would say that I've seen and I think has a lot of value is not everything has to be equally graded. So let's say you have 10 lab reports in a biology class. Well, do they all have to be 10 points each, like 10% of your final grade? Or should the first one be like 1% and the last one be, a little bit more? Because at the end of the term is when you need them to learn and demonstrate that they learned it. You don't want to penalize a student for starting off behind, the start line. They didn't, just because they had further to to learn. That should be something to celebrate instead of to punish them, and I feel like grading can be punitive when we have like 4 exams and they're all 25% of your final grade. Well, you're going to get better at doing that as you move throughout the semester, and I think we need to ensure that the grades at the end of the day tell us the story of whether or not they achieve their learning outcomes. So we sometimes need to look at our policies and determine whether or not they are contributing to that scenario or whether they're deterring us from having students' grades, say whether or not they achieved what they should have achieved by the end of the semester.
You mentioned bio, and I think some of the sciences, this is where, because I do a ton of work with faculty where they have a really difficult time. I'm a math instructor, I'm a bio instructor, I'm a physics instructor. How can I be more culturally affirming in my area of expertise? So is that covered in your upcoming book by any chance?
Absolutely. So I have an example from Carolyn Zender, who teaches a biology class. It's a biology class for non-majors. I think that the key is it can be challenging in some of these really content-dense classes, and I don't want to minimize that. But I think there's some really easy ways to add a culturally affirming piece. So Carolyn's way, and this can be really in any discipline, is not specific to biology only, but you called on biology as an example, so I'm going to give you one. And she just asked students to do a weekly journal. And each weekly journal has a different piece to it. It's called Reflections and Connections. So each week there's a different task. And I'm just going to share a couple of the different tasks that she gave. And clearly this first one specifically is related to biology. But you would obviously modify it to fit your discipline. The first one, she asked students to annotate a picture including you or representation of you, showing how you take part in the carbon cycle. So you could see that she's asking them to visually connect themselves to the content that they're learning about. Another example that she provides is to find a recent news article related to what we just learned about in class. It has to be within the last 2 weeks. It has to be like A, B, and C, and it should be of interest to you. So find something. So you're finding a real world connection to the content that we're talking about here. So I think that this is a very easy way to add a reflection piece. And then, Carolyn's approach, Professor Zender's approach is to really do a weekly journal, but you could also do this after an exam, after a project, after any assignment. In fact, I think that's a really easy way to ensure that they're looking at your feedback by asking them to and grading them on it, but also to learn more about their processes and for them to also become more metacognitive around their own learning processes as well. So, afterwards, maybe you've heard about the exam wrappers and the assignment wrappers and all of those kinds of things where students are just asked to reflect. Well, rather than just reflect on content, you could also ask them to reflect on how did this relate to you and your lived experiences, or how, might this impact your community or might not, right? And maybe you need to hear that too, where are you seeing the gaps between this content and your lived experiences? So you can do all these things in non-graded, activities and exercises. And, you'll recall Adrienne Martin's, example of assignments actually included exercises and endeavors, not just learning tasks and assignments, but it was a more comprehensive definition. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. And sometimes it's very simple. One of my students one of my student contributors in my last book, Keeping Us Engaged, Student Perspectives on What Works and Why. I asked students, I had 50 student contributors in that one. It was really fun to do that book. It was probably one of my favorite publication opportunities. And I remember this one student really talking about how at the end of class, they had to write a note card. And on the note card, they had to indicate something they connected to in class or a question that they had. So there was some kind of personal connection. And then the professor would collect those note cards and would, address some of them. He couldn't address all of them, but would address them in class the next session, or sometimes put it up online or something. So I think that there's so many, it takes maybe 3 to 4 minutes to do that at an end of a class. And I know that's more of an exercise versus an assignment. But when we add those reflection pieces to our assignments, I like to say, use 5% of a grade on that after piece of the assignment, and they can reflect on their learning journey and make some of those connections. So those are just a few examples that I hope that you and the listeners will find useful.
As I've said many times, I think this is the most exciting time in higher ed. There's so many challenges, of course, but it is the most exciting time, because what I'm noticing more and more is the whole being more culturally affirming or responsive. Foundationally, what we hear a lot about, we learned a lot about, it's a mindset, right? You really looking at your craft, really understanding your students, and making sure that we make that shift from external attributions to internal attributions, meaning I don't have a lot of control over what high school they came from or whatever, but I do have control over my teaching. And now we're moving forward to this next phase that I've been wanting for a long time, and that is to then provide some nuts and bolts examples. And you gave us a few. I really appreciate that, because I think faculty hunger for that. I think I get feedback all the time, oh, I just went to this webinar and we were basically lectured and yelled at, we need to be more equitable. And I'm like, okay, thank you. But you gave me absolutely nothing that now I can implement in my classroom. And so these just very practical assignment examples that you gave, I want to say thank you. And the book comes out, there's a order in January?
January is a pre-order, and February 2024 is when it'll be in my hands, which I can't wait to see.
And I'll put this in the show notes so that people are aware of that. One more thing I wanted to mention as we start to kind of wrap up a little bit, and I go back to what you mentioned about having students do reassignments and do assignments again, and just the time and the effort and that it takes. I really like what you said about, well, take your learnings as a faculty, what you're seeing in student work, student products, and you can articulate that, incorporate that into the classroom. And so a lot of my work, when I work with faculty, I like to say we reside at the intersection of data analysis and instructional analysis. And that's a hard place to be sometimes, because it makes us go, oh my gosh, I can now see a better connection between what students produce and what I did or didn't do. But it's a journey. These are places of learning for us too, not just for students, so that as faculty begin to see patterns when they do these culturally affirming assignments and they see where the challenges are, they keep learning, and every semester they just keep getting better and better and better. It's a learning journey for them, right? I was wondering if you had any other kind of last words, or if you wanted to provide another example, anything else that you would like to share today.
Sure. Thanks again for this opportunity, Al. I guess I'd share just a couple of other kind of key takeaways, or I think they'll be useful to the audience. In the book, I have created a checklist, a culturally affirming checklist. So it's basically a list of questions for you to consider if you're interested in making your assignments more culturally affirming and meaningful. So those are pretty, I think they're going to be really useful, because sometimes it's really just that we haven't been trained, right? We get so little support as faculty. It depends on where you are. Some institutions have an awful lot of support and others are not so much. But I think that even those that do, I don't know of another book on assignments specifically. And it's such an important part of a student's learning journey. And it's such an important part of what we do. We spend so much time thinking about what kind of assignments and so much time grading the assignments. It's a huge part of our life and their life in this learning, experience and environment. So I think doing it better is good for all of us. It makes it a much more fun and a rewarding experience when your students are on target with their assignments and you enjoy them, and, getting variety of kinds of things. I like all the faculty I talk to who are doing this, they feel re-energized by it. They're more excited by giving different choices. And instead of reading, 25 of the same exact kind of paper, we have, I got 5 podcasts, I got 5 videos, I have 5 websites, I have, all different kinds of things to do, which in the beginning can be more work because, it's easier to do what's known and what we're used to doing. But with time, you'll get more streamlined at it, I promise. And it'll be more enjoyable work as well. One of my chapters, the Getting to Know You one, actually had a couple of really good questions about doing like a diversity audit of your assignments. So I just wanted to share that real quickly. And then I wanted to end, if you don't mind, on, making some assignments more meaningful too, because we talked a lot about the affirming part, but not as much about the meaningful, which go hand in hand. But let me just highlight the questions, like the diversity audit of your assignments, like even asking yourself simple questions like, whose voices and perspectives are represented by this assignment? In what ways? Whose are not? What perspectives are valued or devalued by doing this assignment? I think just asking some of those kinds of questions of ourselves really gets us thinking about, and sometimes it's a really small shift by just encouraging, like we talked before, like, consider, think about looking for some of those underrepresented voices or marginalized voices. Those are really kind of key. And then I just wanted to end on talking about the meaningful piece. Bridget Arend and Erica Carlson did a great job at really identifying principles and really good guidance on how to ensure that the assignments that you're giving have meaning and value to students. And obviously, the more affirming they are, the more meaningful they are. But this is also about ensuring that they're going to meet their needs in the world of work. So I'll share a quick story with you. A number of years ago now, I lost track of how many, but it's probably a decade or so ago. I remember going to a workshop that I was so blown away by. It was the American Psychological Association. I'm a psychologist by trade, and it was a teaching of psychology session. And basically, they put this big pie chart up, and they said, "Where do psychology graduates go?" And I knew that not all my psychology majors were going on to go get their doctorate degree, but I never really realized it was only 4% that were going on to get their doctorate degree. And when you take a look at the curriculum that we have in psychology, and I don't think we're unique, actually, I'm just using my discipline as one example, we torture our students. 96% of them don't need a lot of what we're giving them. And yet we've catered our curriculum to that 4%. And yes, we need to give that 4% what they need to go on to get their doctorate degree. But in so many ways, most of what we're doing is not that meaningful for a lot of our students. They're not going to need SPSS and these statistical, processes. What they probably would better need is Excel. We can still get at our learning objectives by using different tools, and Excel is going to be utilized by so many more students. And you could give a choice. You could either use Excel to practice these formulas, or you could go and do SPSS. If you're planning to pursue a field, a career in psychology, you might want to do this one. But even APA format, and, we get so worked up around all these and 20-page papers. Well, they're not doing that. That's not really, kind of the norm in the world of work. So, in the book, the authors are really talking about things like, the difference between academic and business writing. Are we helping them get there? So many of them are going into business. We need to help them be more flexible, more collaborative. Oh my gosh, we're going to let them write together? Maybe, right? I don't know about you, but I'm writing a grant proposal now with other people. I'm writing an article. I wrote this book with a gazillion other people, right? So, this is what we need to do, these collaborative kinds of approaches, practical things, and being more concise. I think that that's another area that we, kind of hang on to this length issue, and we focus on how many pages. And it's one of the first questions that students often ask is, how many pages should this be? It's a wrong question, I think, to be asking, but we've train them to do that. So I don't blame the student for asking the question. I blame us for creating a scenario where they need to ask that question because they want to be graded, appropriately and know what our expectations are. So really kind of thinking through, how do we make sure it's meaningful? And that's by ensuring that we have the culturally affirming piece, but also thinking about where they're headed in terms of their career and knowing what industry expectations are and whether or not our assignments are lined up or not for that. I mean, we didn't talk about AI today, but AI is all out there too. And thinking about, are we helping our students develop the skills they need to co-author things with AI, to collaborate with AI. They're going to need to do that. I mean, there's so many resources that have come out even recently. I mean, the whole thing's fairly recent, but I mean, hot off the press recent, the last couple of weeks that are helping higher ed professionals do their job better using AI. So we need to think, really about industry and what needs they have and ensuring that the skill sets that we're giving students and if you'll let me say one more thing about this, Al, we talk in higher ed about learning objectives, and I remember reading an article, and I'm just blanking on the person, so I'm so sorry I'm not able to give credit, but I'll just share it wasn't my idea. That what about talking more in terms of skills language, because it's not just about ensuring they have the skills, but can they talk about the skills? Do they know the skills they have? So I think a really great simple thing you can do on your assignments is have a skills section. This is the skills that you're going to be able to learn as a result of doing this assignment that you'll be able to then talk to employers about. And if you choose this version, these are the skill sets that you're going to use, because they'll vary, right? If you're doing a presentation, a podcast, a paper, some of it'll be similar, the critical thinking and analysis kinds of skills, but some of the delivery and technology skills will definitely be different. So helping them have a language for that, I think can really be useful as well. So I'll end on that note, Al, and hopefully the listeners find that to be of use and value.
Oh, there's so much there. Oh my gosh, we can spend another hour. You unpacked so much. You made such excellent points. Yeah. Just alone, there are associations and then departments at R1 universities. They and then textbooks, they dictate what the content is. And you're so right. Depending on the discipline, so many of it is just not really applicable. We know it's part of the history of a discipline, and so we want to check off, well, we have to talk about this, and we have to talk about this. Happens in math too, actually. There's areas in math where it's just not necessary. Why are we teaching that? Yes, we know this guy from the 1300s came up with it, but it doesn't mean we have to teach it. We're not using it. Anyway, I actually have a cool example I'll share with you. I have this inquiry and action process. I work with faculty and we create data-informed purpose statements and we do a little bit of research and then we implement something in our practice. And I think it's so cool because you reminded me with what you were just talking about. I've been working with a communications faculty team, and they came up with a way to help students better identify what they want to do in terms of a career. And so they're incorporating, communications. It's actually a speech course. They have to do a speech. But their speech is on their research on industries and careers and why they are gravitating or why they chose a particular guided pathway, if you will, right? That's another example where you give students an opportunity to, especially if they are unclear about their path, or maybe they are super clear and then they can articulate that. Again, I'm just seeing such good work. I think this is the most exciting time in higher ed. I just think that faculty need more concrete examples. So thank you so much for providing that. I can't thank you enough for that, and looking forward to when the book is released. just thank you so much for participating in the Student Success Podcast.
Well, thank you, Alan. I want to give a big shout out to all of my contributing authors because this book would not have been possible without all of them. And for many of them, it's their first, writing adventure, and others have been doing this a bit. So it's a nice mix of kind of new folks in the field. But I think it's so important for us to all share. And without them sharing their thoughts, ideas, contributions, we wouldn't be able to have this book. So thank you for having me and for all the great work that you do. I love listening to all your podcasts. I always gain such good takeaways because I know you push people to make sure it's practical, which I appreciate. And that it definitely helps me. I have changed many of my actions because of your work, and I know others have too. So thank you for all that you do as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Christine. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Student Success Podcast. Each episode has show notes, which include helpful links and necessary follow-up information to help you get results. Please consider subscribing to the Continuous Learning Institute website. There are no advertisements. It's simply updates about articles, tools, resources, podcasts, etc., all tailored for you, the practitioner. Thank you.